He wasn't barking at a wall. He was warning the world that someone was still alive behind it. The words would stay with everyone who witnessed that cold November night outside an abandoned Marine training facility in Quantico, Virginia. For nearly 6 hours, a white German Shepherd canine named Ghost stood beneath the rain and refused to move. His paws pressed against the cracked concrete floor. His breath appeared like small clouds in the freezing air. His eyes never left the old concrete wall standing at the end of the forgotten storage corridor. He barked once, then again, not with fear, not with confusion, with purpose. The kind of purpose that made one man stop walking away. Staff Sergeant Marcus Whitaker had seen strange things during his years as a United States Marine. He had seen storms swallow entire landscapes. He had seen people lose hope in places where hope seemed impossible. But he had never seen a dog look at a wall like it was looking at a person. Marcus stood under the flickering yellow light above the corridor entrance, his dark jacket soaked from the rain outside, watching Ghost with a quiet concern. The abandoned facility smelled of wet concrete, old metal, and the faint memory of a place that had once been full of life. Years ago, Marines trained here. Commands echoed through these halls. Boots crossed these floors before sunrise. Now, only wind moved through the empty buildings. Marcus lowered his flashlight and looked at his partner. "Ghost," he said softly, his voice carrying the calm discipline of a man who had spent years giving orders. "Tell me what you hear." The German Shepherd did not turn around. The white fur along his neck was damp, shining beneath the weak light. Ghost was not an ordinary dog. He was a canine who had spent years learning the difference between a normal sound and a cry for help hidden beneath the noise of the world. Marcus knew that better than anyone. He had met Ghost after a difficult chapter in his own life. A chapter filled with memories he rarely spoke about. A chapter where he learned that some wounds were invisible, but still heavy enough to change the way a person walked through life. Ghost had become more than a working dog. He had become the one companion who never asked Marcus to explain his silence. The one soul that simply stayed. But tonight, even Marcus wondered if his partner was wrong. The facility had been searched before. The old buildings were scheduled for renovation. Engineers had inspected the structure. Security teams had walked through every hallway. There was no reason for anything to be behind that wall. "Come on, boy," Marcus whispered. "Show me." Ghost slowly stepped closer to the concrete. He lowered his head, placing his ear near the cold surface. The hallway became completely still. The rain tapped against the broken windows. Somewhere far away, a loose metal sign moved in the wind. Marcus held his breath. For a moment, there was nothing. Then Ghost lifted his head. His ears moved forward. His entire body became still. Marcus felt something change. He had seen that posture before. On rescue missions. During searches. In moments when Ghost knew something before humans did. "You found something," Marcus said quietly. Ghost looked back at him for only a second. And then it happened. A sound so small that another person might have missed it. A faint knock. Coming from the other side of the concrete. Marcus froze. The rain continued falling outside, but the world inside that hallway seemed to stop. Ghost did not bark this time. He simply sat down beside the wall, staring at Marcus as if waiting for him to understand. For years, Marcus had believed that some things were lost forever. Trust, purpose, the feeling that his actions still mattered. But standing beside a white canine in an empty building, listening to a sound no one else believed existed, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. And behind that old concrete wall, something was waiting. Marcus Whitaker had spent years learning that silence could reveal more than words. A battlefield could be loud, but the truth was often hidden in the quiet moments afterward. That was why he did not ignore Ghost. The white German Shepherd canine had never been a dog that wasted energy. Every movement had meaning. Every pause had a reason. As the rain continued to fall outside the abandoned Marine training facility in Quantico, Virginia, Marcus remained beside him, staring at the old concrete wall that had somehow captured the attention of the most disciplined canine he had ever known. The faint knock they heard moments earlier was gone. The hallway returned to its lonely stillness. But Ghost did not move. He sat with his head slightly lowered, his blue-gray eyes fixed on the wall, as if waiting for someone on the other side to speak again. Marcus slowly reached down and placed his hand on Ghost's white fur. The dog looked up for a moment, and in that brief glance, Marcus remembered why he trusted him. Ghost was not looking for praise. He was not searching for a reward. He was listening. The next morning, the facility was surrounded by the soft gray light of early winter. The rain had stopped, leaving the old buildings covered in tiny drops of water that reflected the morning sun. The air smelled like wet stone, pine trees, and cold metal. A small inspection team arrived to examine the area, led by Captain Andrew Collins, a Marine officer known for his careful decisions and calm leadership. He walked beside Marcus through the corridor, studying the damaged walls and empty rooms. "You are certain about this?" Captain Collins asked. Marcus looked toward Ghost, who was already standing near the concrete wall again. "I have worked with him for years," Marcus answered. "When he gives a signal like this, there is a reason." Captain Collins watched the K9 carefully. "Machines checked this building last month. Nothing unusual was found." Marcus nodded. He understood. Logic mattered. Training mattered. Evidence mattered. But so did experience. Ghost had spent years finding what others missed. He had learned to recognize things hidden beneath layers of noise. A few technicians examined the wall with equipment. They scanned the surface, checked the structure, and reviewed old building records. Everything appeared normal. The results showed no obvious signs of anything unusual. One technician removed his headset and looked at Marcus. "Sergeant, I do not know what your dog is sensing, but there is nothing showing up here." Marcus did not argue. He simply looked back at Ghost. The K9 was not disappointed. He was not confused. He lowered his nose toward the floor and slowly walked along the base of the wall. Then he stopped beside a small section where the concrete looked slightly different from the rest. It was almost impossible for a person to notice. But Ghost noticed. Marcus crouched down and brushed away a thin layer of dust near the floor. Beneath it was a faded marking, an old symbol from the facility's early years, a symbol that had been covered and forgotten. Captain Collins stepped closer. That area was not in the original blueprints. The hallway became quiet again. Marcus felt the same strange feeling he had experienced the night before. Not fear, not confusion, something deeper. A feeling that they were standing in front of a story that had been waiting a long time to be discovered. Ghost moved closer and gently touched his nose to the wall. This time, he did not bark. He simply waited. Marcus remembered the first day he met him. Ghost had been quiet then too. He had been a young K9 learning to trust a new handler. Marcus had been a Marine learning how to carry memories that he could not explain. Neither of them had spoken, but somehow they understood each other. They had both learned that loyalty was not always about following commands. Sometimes loyalty meant staying when everyone else walked away. As the team prepared to return with additional equipment, Marcus stayed behind for one more moment. He placed his hand against the cold concrete. The wall felt ordinary, heavy, silent, but Ghost sat beside him, completely certain that something was there. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus allowed himself to believe that some answers were not found by searching harder. Some answers were found by listening carefully to the ones who never stopped trying to be heard. Marcus Whitaker had always believed that every place carried a memory. Some memories were written in photographs. Some were carried in old uniforms hanging inside closets. And some were hidden beneath layers of dust, waiting for someone patient enough to find them. As the morning continued at the abandoned Marine training facility in Quantico, Virginia, the concrete wall became more than just a structure. It became a question. The inspection team returned with additional equipment, but Marcus stayed close to Ghost. The white German Shepherd K9 rested beside him, calm and focused, as if he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. The cold air moved through the empty corridor, carrying the scent of aged concrete and forgotten rooms. Outside, the winter clouds slowly began to separate, allowing thin rays of sunlight to reach the cracked windows. Captain Andrew Collins reviewed the old facility records on a tablet while the technicians compared them with the building layout. "There is a section missing from the original plans," he finally said. Marcus looked over. "Missing?" Captain Collins nodded. "A small area, about 12 feet behind this wall. It was listed in older documents, but later removed from updated records." The words settled over the hallway. 12 feet. A hidden space that had existed for years without anyone remembering. Ghost lifted his head at the sound of the captain's voice. His ears moved forward, but he remained still. Marcus noticed. The dog was not reacting to the discovery. He had already known. That realization stayed with Marcus. Ghost had not been guessing. He had been waiting for them to catch up. The team carefully studied the wall. There were no signs of immediate danger, no obvious reason anyone would have hidden the space. It was simply forgotten. But forgotten did not mean empty. Marcus stepped away from the group and watched Ghost. The canine reminded him of another time, years earlier, when they first met. Back then, Marcus was still wearing his Marine uniform every day. His life was measured by schedules, missions, and responsibility. He believed every problem had a solution if he worked hard enough. Then life taught him something different. Some problems could not be fixed by strength alone. Some losses could not be erased. After a difficult assignment overseas, Marcus returned home carrying memories he rarely shared. Friends noticed he was quieter. Family noticed he spent more time alone. But Ghost seemed to understand without needing an explanation. The dog never forced Marcus to talk. He simply stayed nearby, a silent companion who reminded him that loyalty was not about having all the answers. It was about refusing to leave someone behind. "You have been here before, haven't you?" Marcus whispered to Ghost. The canine looked at him, then back at the wall. That small movement brought an unexpected feeling to Marcus. Not sadness, not fear, something closer to wonder. The technicians continued their work, carefully examining the hidden section. One of them discovered an old metal plate beneath layers of paint and dust. It carried a faded marking from the original training unit that had occupied the building decades earlier. Captain Collins brushed away the remaining dirt and read the name attached to the record. This area belonged to the original K9 division. Marcus looked at Ghost. The dog stood perfectly still. The connection was impossible to ignore. The hidden room was not just part of an old building. It was connected to the history of dogs like Ghost. Dogs trained to search. Dogs trained to protect. Dogs trained to believe that every life mattered. The captain looked through the archived notes and found something unusual. The final entry about the hidden room was dated nearly 20 years earlier. After that day, the records simply stopped. No explanation. No update. Just silence. Marcus felt a familiar weight in his chest. He knew what silence could mean. It could mean something had ended. But sometimes, silence only meant something was waiting to be found. Ghost walked forward and placed his paw gently against the floor near the wall. He looked back at Marcus. There was no urgency in his eyes. Only trust. Marcus slowly nodded. "All right, partner," he said softly. "We will find out what you heard." The team prepared for the next step. The old facility remained quiet around them, but the feeling had changed. It no longer felt abandoned. It felt like a place holding its breath. Somewhere behind the forgotten wall was a story that had been hidden for years. And standing beside Marcus was the one friend who had listened closely enough to hear it. The old Marine facility had been silent for years, but that morning, it felt as if the walls themselves were remembering. The corridor where Marcus Whitaker and Ghost stood no longer felt like an abandoned place filled with dust and shadows. It felt like a doorway to something that had been waiting patiently for someone to notice. The inspection team prepared the equipment while the winter sunlight slowly moved across the concrete floor. Ghost remained beside Marcus, watching every movement with quiet attention. The white German Shepherd K9 was not restless anymore. He had done what he came to do. He had brought them here. Captain Andrew Collins studied the old records one more time before looking toward the hidden section of the wall. The original documents mention a K9 training area behind this section, he said. But there is very little information after that. Marcus looked at the faded markings on the concrete. The letters were worn, but they carried the memory of a time when this hallway was filled with handlers and working dogs. "Someone wanted this place forgotten," Marcus said quietly. Captain Collins did not answer immediately. He looked at the wall, then at Ghost. Maybe, or maybe someone simply lost track of it. The difference between being hidden and being forgotten was small. But Marcus knew both could leave behind the same feeling. A sense that something important had been left behind. The technicians carefully began examining the structure. They used small tools to study the surface and compare the readings with the building records. Every few minutes, Ghost moved closer, observing them. He never interfered. He never barked. He simply watched. Marcus recognized that behavior. Ghost was waiting. Hours earlier, everyone thought the dog was reacting to something impossible. Now, everyone was starting to wonder if the impossible was exactly what they were looking at. A young technician named Emily Carter walked back from the equipment station, holding an old file folder she had found in a storage cabinet nearby. The paper inside had yellowed with age. The edges were worn. "Captain, you should see this," she said. Collins opened the folder carefully. Inside were notes from the original K9 division. Training, schedules, handler reports, names of dogs that had served at the facility. Marcus stood beside him, reading the old entries. Then one name caught his attention. A German shepherd named Atlas. The notes described Atlas as a highly skilled search K9 known for his patience and unusual ability to locate people during difficult rescue situations. Marcus glanced down at Ghost. The resemblance was impossible to ignore, not because they looked exactly alike, but because they carried the same quiet determination, the same focus, the same willingness to stand beside someone who needed help. Ghost's line came from this unit, Marcus said softly. Captain Collins looked surprised. "You knew?" Marcus shook his head. "No, but I think he did." The hallway became quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the trees surrounding the facility. The sound was gentle, almost like a whisper passing through the empty buildings. Marcus remembered something his first K9 instructor had told him years ago. A good working dog does not just follow commands. A good working dog learns people. It learns their fear, their hope, their pain, and sometimes it learns things that cannot be explained. Ghost suddenly stood. His ears lifted. His attention returned to the wall. Everyone noticed. The technicians stopped what they were doing. Marcus slowly approached. "What is it, boy?" For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Ghost walked along the wall until he reached a small corner where the concrete met the floor. He lowered his head and touched the surface with his nose. Marcus followed his gaze. There was something there. Not a sound this time. A scent. An old scent buried beneath years of dust and cold air. Ghost closed his eyes for a moment, almost as if remembering something from a place he had never been. Marcus felt a strange emotion rise inside him. He had spent years wondering why Ghost was different. Why this dog seemed to understand things before anyone else. Maybe the answer was not about training. Maybe it was about connection. Maybe some forms of loyalty traveled farther than anyone could measure. Captain Collins stepped closer. "Do you think there is really something behind there?" Marcus looked at Ghost, then at the wall. "I think he believes there is." The captain studied the dog for a long moment. Then he gave a small nod. Sometimes that is enough to keep looking. The team prepared for a deeper examination of the hidden area. The old concrete remained between them and the unknown, but the feeling inside the hallway had changed completely. They were no longer searching because a machine suggested something might be there. They were searching because one loyal K9 refused to stop listening. And as Marcus stood beside Ghost, he understood something he had almost forgotten. Not every message arrives through a voice. Not every rescue begins with someone calling for help. Sometimes, it begins with someone faithful enough to hear what everyone else has stopped trying to find. The afternoon light slowly faded over the abandoned marine facility, leaving long shadows stretching across the forgotten corridor. The old building had spent years holding its secrets, but now every person standing inside felt the weight of what they had uncovered. Marcus Whitaker remained beside Ghost, watching the technicians prepare for a closer examination of the hidden section behind the concrete wall. The white German Shepherd K9 sat calmly, his ears relaxed but his attention fixed. He looked peaceful, but Marcus knew better. Ghost was never truly resting when there was something important nearby. He was waiting. The team carefully reviewed the old records one more time. The name Atlas remained open on the screen, a reminder of the K9s who had served before. Dogs who had searched through storms, found missing people, and stood beside their handlers through difficult moments. Marcus ran his fingers along Ghost's collar and looked down at him. "You were never just trained to find things," he whispered. "You were trained to remember." Ghost looked up at him, his pale eyes reflecting the soft afternoon light. For a moment, Marcus felt the strange connection between past and present. A dog from another generation. A soldier carrying old memories. Two lives connected by something neither could fully explain. The technicians began a careful inspection of the lower section of the wall. They discovered that the concrete was older than the surrounding structure. It had been added later, covering an area that was not shown on newer plans. Captain Andrew Collins stood nearby, studying the information. "This was not random," he said. "Someone intentionally sealed this area." Marcus looked at the wall. "Why?" No one answered. The question remained in the air. The facility had been built for training and preparation, a place where Marines and K9s learned to work together. Every hallway had once carried purpose. Every room had once held stories. But this section had disappeared from memory. As the team continued their work, Ghost suddenly moved away from Marcus. He walked slowly toward an old storage cabinet near the end of the corridor. Everyone watched as he stopped in front of it. The cabinet was covered in dust. It looked like it had not been opened in years. Marcus followed him. "What is it, Ghost?" The K9 gently touched the cabinet door with his nose. A technician opened it carefully. Inside were old training materials, faded photographs, and several worn notebooks. The items were covered with time, but they had been protected from the weather. Marcus picked up one of the photographs. It showed a younger Marine standing beside a German Shepherd K9 outside the same building. The Marine was smiling. The dog sat proudly beside him. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten note. "For every handler who believes their partner is more than a dog." Marcus paused. Those words stayed with him. He knew exactly what they meant. To some people, a K9 was equipment, a tool, a trained animal following commands. But to the people who served beside them, they were something different. They were partners. They were family. Ghost watched Marcus quietly as he held the photograph. The dog did not know the names written in the old records. He did not know the history stored inside the walls. But somehow, he had brought them here. The team continued searching through the cabinet. Among the old documents, Emily Carter discovered a small report that had never been added to the digital archive. "Captain, there is something here," she said. Everyone gathered around. The report described a final training exercise involving a K9 unit before the facility was closed. It mentioned a handler and his dog being assigned to a special search project inside the building. But the final page was missing. The story stopped before the conclusion. Marcus felt the same feeling return. The feeling that something was close. Something unfinished. Ghost suddenly lifted his head. His ears moved toward the concrete wall again. This time, Marcus noticed something different. The dog was not focused on the wall itself. He was focused on a small area beside it where the floor met the foundation. The team moved closer. A faint mark was visible beneath years of dust. It was not a warning sign. It was not a construction note. It was a symbol used by the old K9 division. Marcus looked at Ghost and felt his heart become heavy with curiosity. The dog had not simply found a hidden room. He had followed a trail left behind by another generation of loyalty. As the sun disappeared beyond the trees, the team made plans to return the next morning with specialized equipment. The facility grew quiet again. One by one, people left the corridor until only Marcus and Ghost remained. Marcus sat beside him on the cold floor. "You know something we do not know, don't you?" he said softly. Ghost rested his head beside Marcus's hand. There was no answer, no explanation, just trust. And in that quiet moment, Marcus understood that some journeys are not about finding what was lost. They are about discovering why it was waiting to be found. The next morning arrived with a silence that felt different from the days before. The abandoned marine facility in Quantico, Virginia, no longer felt like an empty building waiting to be forgotten. It felt like a place holding its breath. The first light of sunrise moved through the broken windows, painting the old corridor with soft gold and revealing every crack, every mark, every forgotten corner. Marcus Whitaker arrived before the rest of the team. He carried 2 cups of coffee, one for himself and one he placed beside the equipment table out of habit, then smiled quietly when he realized Ghost was already waiting near the wall. The white German Shepherd K9 stood perfectly still, his eyes focused on the hidden section of concrete. Marcus walked over and rested his hand on Ghost's shoulder. "You knew we would come back," he said softly. Ghost looked at him for a moment, then turned back toward the wall. That simple movement told Marcus everything. The dog was not following him. He was leading him. Soon, Captain Andrew Collins and the inspection team arrived with specialized equipment. The atmosphere was different from the day before. No one laughed at Ghost anymore. No one questioned why he had stayed for hours. They had seen enough to understand that the K9 was not acting randomly. There was a reason. The team began carefully examining the sealed section. They studied the structure, reviewed old documents, and compared the measurements with the original facility plans. The hidden space behind the wall was approximately 12 feet deep, just as the old records suggested. But something still did not make sense. If the room existed, why had it been removed from every modern record? Why had nobody mentioned it for so many years? Marcus stood quietly as the questions grew. He knew the feeling. Some things disappeared because people wanted them gone. Other things disappeared because time simply moved on and left them behind. Ghost suddenly lifted his head. His ears moved slightly. Marcus noticed immediately. "Everyone stop for a second," he said. The team paused. Ghost walked toward the wall and lowered his nose near a small section close to the floor. He remained there for several moments. The technicians watched carefully. Then one of them checked the area with a scanner. The device showed a small empty space behind the concrete. Captain Collins stepped closer. "There is definitely something there." The hallway became quiet. For the first time, the impossible thing Ghost had sensed was becoming something people could measure. Marcus looked at his partner and felt a deep sense of respect. Ghost had never needed proof. He had only needed someone willing to listen. The team continued their careful work. As they prepared the equipment, Marcus noticed an old symbol carved faintly into the lower part of the wall. It was the same symbol they had found in the old canine records. A simple marking used by handlers decades earlier. A reminder that every search had a purpose. Every life mattered. Marcus traced the symbol lightly with his fingers. He thought about his own journey. The years he spent believing he had to carry every burden alone. The moments when he stopped asking for help because he thought strength meant silence. Then he looked at Ghost. The dog had taught him something different. Real strength was not pretending you never needed anyone. Real strength was trusting someone enough to stand beside you. As the team prepared to open a small section of the wall, Ghost sat down near Marcus. He was calm, patient, the way he had been from the beginning. Captain Collins looked at the K9 and gave a small smile. "I think your partner has better instincts than our equipment." Marcus smiled back. He usually does. The first layer of concrete was carefully removed. Dust drifted through the sunlight, floating like tiny pieces of history returning to the air. Everyone waited. No one spoke. Even the old building seemed quiet. Behind that wall was not just a hidden room. It was a missing piece of a story connected to Marines, K9s, and the promises they made to never leave someone behind. Ghost watched every movement. His tail rested gently on the floor. He was not searching anymore. He was waiting for the truth to finally come home. The first opening in the concrete revealed nothing at first. Only darkness. Only the quiet emptiness of a space that had been sealed away for years. The team stood still, waiting, listening, as the old Marine facility seemed to hold on to its final secret. Marcus Whitaker watched the narrow opening carefully. Beside him, Ghost remained calm, his white fur glowing softly beneath the morning light entering through the broken windows. The German Shepherd K9 did not move toward the opening. He did not bark. He simply looked at Marcus, as if reminding him that patience had always been part of the mission. The technicians continued removing the old concrete layer by layer. Every movement was careful. Every piece removed revealed more of a forgotten place hidden behind the wall. Dust filled the air, carrying the scent of old stone, paper, and time itself. Then, after several minutes, one of the technicians stopped. "Captain, there is a door." Everyone looked closer. Behind the concrete was a small metal door covered by years of age. It was not damaged. It was not broken. It was simply forgotten. Captain Andrew Collins stepped forward and examined the surface. A faded K9 division marking was still visible near the handle. Marcus felt a strange feeling in his chest. This was not just an abandoned room. This was a place connected to the history of people and animals who had served together. The door was opened slowly. The sound echoed through the empty corridor, a sound that felt almost like the building itself was waking up after a long sleep. Inside was a small room filled with old equipment, shelves, notebooks, and photographs. The air was different inside. It carried the scent of paper and memories. The team entered carefully, their flashlights moving across the walls. Marcus stepped forward and immediately noticed something. This room was not storage. It was a place where someone had worked. A place where someone had spent time. On one wall were photographs of Marine handlers standing beside their K9 partners. Some dogs wore working vests. Others simply sat beside their handlers with the quiet confidence of trusted companions. Marcus walked closer, studying each image. He saw the same connection repeated again and again. A person, a dog, a promise. Ghost followed him into the room and stopped near one of the photographs. Marcus looked down. The image showed a young handler standing beside a white German Shepherd. The dog had the same calm expression Ghost carried, the same focused eyes, the same quiet presence. Marcus carefully picked up the photograph from the shelf. On the back was a handwritten note. A great canine does not search because he is commanded. He searches because he cares. Marcus read the words twice. They felt familiar, not because he had heard them before, but because he had lived them. Captain Collins joined him and looked at the photograph. That dog looks a lot like Ghost. Marcus nodded slowly. Maybe some things are carried forward. As the team searched deeper into the room, Emily Carter discovered another notebook hidden beneath a stack of old training manuals. The cover was worn, but the pages inside were carefully preserved. She opened it gently and began reading. The notebook belonged to a K-9 handler named Thomas Reed. The entries described years of training, partnership, and moments shared with a German shepherd named Atlas. Marcus listened as Emily read one entry aloud. Atlas always stops when others keep walking. He listens when others hear nothing. Never ignore what a good dog is trying to tell you. The hallway outside seemed quieter after those words. Marcus looked at Ghost. The connection felt impossible to dismiss. Ghost had not found this place by accident. Somehow, he had followed a path created long before he arrived. A path built by trust. A path built by loyalty. Then Emily turned another page and stopped. "Captain, there is something here." Everyone gathered around. The final entries in the notebook were incomplete. They mentioned an emergency search assignment at the facility years earlier. A search involving Atlas and his handler. But the last page ended before the story was finished. No explanation. No conclusion. Just an unfinished sentence. Marcus felt the same question return. What happened here? Why was this place hidden? And why had Ghost been the one to bring them back? Suddenly, Ghost moved away from the photographs and walked toward the far corner of the room. He stopped beside an old storage cabinet. Marcus followed him. Inside the cabinet was a small metal box covered in dust. The team opened it carefully. Inside was a single K-9 identification tag and an old letter sealed in an envelope. Marcus looked at Ghost. The dog stared back quietly. For the first time, Marcus realized they were not just uncovering history. They were uncovering a promise that had never truly ended. And somewhere inside that forgotten room was the final piece that would explain why Ghost had listened when everyone else had stopped hearing. The small metal box sat in the center of the forgotten room, surrounded by the quiet history of a place that had been hidden for far too long. Marcus Whitaker stood beside the table, looking at the old K-9 identification tag resting inside. The metal was worn, the edges softened by time, but the name engraved on it was still clear. Atlas. For a moment, nobody spoke. The room felt heavier, not because of fear, but because of the memories contained inside those walls. Marcus reached out and carefully picked up the tag. He felt the same feeling he had experienced since Ghost first stopped at the concrete wall. The feeling that something important was waiting to be understood. Captain Andrew Collins watched quietly. He knew Marcus did not see the tag as just a piece of metal. To him, it represented a connection between generations of Marines and K-9 partners who had trusted each other without needing words. Emily Carter carefully opened the old envelope found beside the tag. Inside was a letter written decades earlier. The paper was fragile, but the handwriting remained clear. She began reading softly. The letter was from Thomas Reed, the original K-9 handler of Atlas. It was not a report. It was not an official document. It was a personal message. A message written to remember a partner who had changed his life. A K-9 does not measure loyalty by time. Emily read. A true partner remembers what the heart cannot forget. Marcus lowered his eyes. Those words reached deeper than he expected. He understood that kind of loyalty. The kind that stayed even when circumstances changed. The kind that remained even after years had passed. Ghost moved closer to Marcus and rested beside him. The white German shepherd K-9 seemed to understand the quiet moment. The room was filled with photographs, records, and reminders of people who had once stood in the same place. People who believed that every life mattered. Captain Collins continued examining the documents inside the box. Then he found something that changed everything. A small report attached to the back of the letter. It described an unfinished search mission that took place shortly before the facility closed. Thomas Reed and Atlas had been assigned to investigate unusual signals coming from the lower section of the building. The report mentioned that Atlas repeatedly returned to the same area near the hidden room. the same area where Ghost had been standing for hours. Marcus looked toward the wall. The connection was impossible to ignore. Ghost had followed a path that another canine had walked many years before. He was following Atlas, Emily whispered. Marcus shook his head slightly. Maybe not following, he said. Maybe remembering. The room became silent again. Outside, the wind moved through the trees surrounding the facility. The sound traveled through the old building like a gentle reminder that time never truly erases everything. Some things remain. Some bonds survive. The team continued reading through the remaining documents. They discovered that Thomas Reed had spent years training K9s after Atlas retired. He believed every dog carried lessons from the ones before them. Every generation learned from the last. Every act of kindness created a path for someone else to follow. Marcus looked at Ghost and thought about their own journey. When they first met, he was a Marine who believed he had to carry every burden alone. Ghost had never tried to fix his past. The dog had never asked him to explain the things he could not say. He simply stayed. That was the lesson Marcus had forgotten. Sometimes healing did not come from finding perfect answers. Sometimes it came from having someone beside you while you searched. Then Ghost suddenly lifted his head. His ears turned toward the far corner of the room. Marcus noticed immediately. The K9 stood and walked toward a small wooden cabinet that had not been opened. The team gathered around as Marcus carefully pulled the cabinet door open. Inside was another notebook wrapped in protective covering. Unlike the others, this one was newer. The pages were not damaged by time. Emily opened it carefully and read the first line. It was written by someone who had returned to the facility years after it was abandoned. If anyone finds this, please know that Atlas was right. He was always right. Marcus felt his breath slow. The sentence carried a mystery that had waited years to be discovered. Ghost sat beside him, watching quietly. The answer was close now. The hidden room had revealed the past, but something still remained unfinished. Something connected Atlas, Thomas Reed, and the reason Ghost had refused to leave that wall. And as Marcus held the notebook in his hands, he realized they were no longer searching for a secret. They were searching for a promise that had been waiting all these years to be kept. The notebook felt heavier than its small size should have allowed. Marcus Whitaker stood in the quiet room of the abandoned Marine facility, holding the pages that had waited years to be discovered. Around him, the old photographs, faded documents, and forgotten K9 equipment seemed to tell the same story. Loyalty had a way of surviving. Even when people forgot. Even when buildings became empty. Even when time covered everything with dust. Emily Carter carefully turned the pages of the notebook while Captain Andrew Collins watched beside her. The handwriting belonged to someone who had returned to this place long after the facility closed. Someone who knew about Atlas. Someone who understood what the old K9 had been trying to show. Listen to this, Emily said softly. She read the words written on the page. Atlas never searched for objects. He searched for lives. He believed every quiet place had a story waiting to be heard. Marcus looked down at Ghost. The white German Shepherd K9 was lying beside him, calm and focused. Those words felt like they were written for him. Not because Ghost was the same dog as Atlas, but because they carried the same purpose. The same quiet determination. The same belief that no one should be forgotten. The team continued reading through the notebook. They discovered that Thomas Reed had returned to the facility years after his service ended. He had spent time documenting the history of the K9 division and preserving the stories of the dogs and handlers who served there. The final pages explained something that changed everything. Atlas had discovered a hidden section beneath the facility during his final years of service. The area was not dangerous. It was simply forgotten. A small training room used by the original K9 unit. A place where handlers taught young dogs the most important lesson of all. Not how to follow commands, but how to trust their instincts. Marcus slowly looked around the room. He imagined the sound of boots walking across the floor decades earlier. He imagined handlers sitting beside their dogs after long training days. He imagined the bond between people and animals that could never be measured by records or medals. Then Ghost stood up. The movement was gentle, but everyone noticed. The K9 walked toward the far wall of the hidden room and stopped near a small wooden panel. Marcus followed. The panel looked ordinary, but Ghost stared at it with complete attention. Captain Collins stepped closer. There is more. Marcus did not answer right away. He knew Ghost well enough to understand that the dog was not searching randomly. He was following a memory. The team carefully examined the panel and discovered a small compartment behind it. Inside was a final document sealed inside a protective cover. Emily opened it slowly. The paper contained a message written by Thomas Reed. It was not addressed to a person. It was addressed to whoever found the room. If you are reading this, then a canine brought you here. Trust that dog. They see what we miss. They hear what we ignore. And they remember the promises we make. Marcus felt a quiet emotion rise inside him. He thought about all the moments in life when people stopped listening, when they moved too quickly, when they looked for answers in complicated places while ignoring the simple signs in front of them. Ghost had never needed a machine to tell him something mattered. He had never needed approval. He had simply stayed loyal to what he sensed. The afternoon sun moved through the old windows, filling the hidden room with warm light. For the first time in many years, the forgotten space did not feel forgotten anymore. It felt honored. Captain Collins placed the documents back carefully. I think we finally understand why he brought us here. Marcus nodded. Not to find a room. He looked at Ghost. To remember. The canine walked back to Marcus and rested beside him. The Marine placed a hand gently on his companion's back. For years, Marcus had believed that some chapters of life ended forever. But standing there with Ghost, surrounded by the history of those who came before them, he realized something different. Some stories do not disappear. They wait for the right heart to find them. And sometimes, the one who leads you back to what matters most is not the person standing beside you. Sometimes, it is the loyal soul walking quietly at your side.